am Glaucia Rosas, co-founder and director at the EduTech Alliance. In this series of interviews, I am talking with key figures on the international EduTech scene to get their perspectives on how schools can really get themselves on track with their education technology. Hi everyone, today I have the pleasure to have here Psalti. It's a tech guru and AI evangelist. Eve has led the Microsoft global strategy for its education program, has worked as head of strategic platforms at Google, and now is again at Microsoft as principal group project manager. There are a number of publications that Eve has contributed to and written, so I really encourage everyone to read and learn from her. So hi Eve, thank you so much for being here. It's
Hi, Glaucia. Great to be here.
An honor to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's great being here.
So, well, you do a lot of work on artificial intelligence and cognitive sciences, but those concepts are not widely understood in the education sector. So, can you help us and define to our audience what is the definition of artificial intelligence?
Absolutely. That's a great question because I think artificial intelligence is multifaceted. The very basic definition of AI is simply when a computer or an engine or a program is able to perform tasks that would usually be performed by humans. Mm-hmm. So the computer is basically training itself and programming itself to do these tasks. And some of the characteristics that I think a lot of people will kind of recognize because we all interface with AI, whether we realize it or not. But because it's infused and integrated into everyday activities or experiences, sometimes we don't realize that it's all of these engines and systems are AI powered. Mm-hmm. For example, at the very basis, I think of it as a stack from a technology standpoint. And at the bottom, you have the machine learning kind of engine. This is where you have your AI models. This is where you really kind of collect all the data to train these models. And then on top of that, you have different services like cognitive services. These things are like speech, language, vision, and they're many real world applications of AI that we kind of like interact with. And I can name a few, like for example, speech recognition, which uses computer speech. It also has the capability of accessing or really integrating natural language processing to translate, a human speech into written format. And we've all kind of interacted with chatbots or with virtual agents. They are able to kind of like automate tasks usually found in FAQ. Things like shipping or personalized type of advice. We see messaging bots in e-commerce sites with virtual agents. We also see computer vision. We see this really prominent in healthcare, like in radiology. We use it when we tag images and pictures in our social media accounts. We see it also in self-driving cars in the automotive industry. So there are a lot of different ways that AI is kind of manifesting in our everyday life. And I think it will continue to proliferate and really be part of kind of like, what we do every day.
Definitely. And well, knowing this whole context in its application in all types of industries, what do you think is the role that AI has in teaching and learning and the school management and the education experience itself?
That's a great question because I think that's definitely evolving and changing. We see that machine learning and artificial intelligence are key drivers of growth and innovation across many in industries, and education is definitely one of them. I was reading an article the other day that from the e-learning in industry, saying that more than half of the learning management tools that we currently use have AI capabilities. So it's already there, it's quite prominent. It might not be as widely used and adopted at the school level, but I think the tools and the technology is already at that kind of like, really advanced stage. We also see that also the majority of educators see kind of like ed tech as part of, as a core part of their education practice, which is great. And I think they realize that AI has a power to optimize both the learning and the teaching part of the job. I would say a couple of things that we see kind of like, as benefits of AI in the education industry is both on the student side and on the educator side. And first of all, is personalization, which is key. And it's one of the biggest trends in education, but also a real need in order to provide a highly personalized approach to learning programs to allow students to learn at their own pace and based on their own preferences and capabilities. So we see more and more AI-powered solutions that analyze students' previous learning histories. They identify weaknesses, or they suggest courses that are best suited for improving areas that they might want to focus on. Also, what I've seen more and more is, we know that a lot of students usually seek help outside the classroom, and many educators might not have the time to provide that kind of like extra help. So we see AI tutors and chatbots that are really providing a lot of support for these students. And we know absolutely that a chatbot or any type of AI will never really replace an educator. But these AI tools, I think, can be really great, help for the educator and for the student, so that they can improve the learning inside and outside the classroom.
Yes, they do have some fears that the technology will replace the teacher, especially with artificial intelligence. And I completely agree with you. If used well, if the school and the teacher are keen to understand it, they will find new ways of working with the kids and providing them with more than what they have now, just by using AI to their benefits, definitely.
Exactly. We also see a lot of benefits for educators. Similarly, on the personalization side, they're able to use these tools to provide kind of like a personalized learning path for each of the students. They are able to analyze students per performance, kind of like, seeing who is falling behind so that they can bring them kind of like at the same level and bring them back into being kind of like attentive and productive in the classroom. Also, I think for the educator, AI is a great way to automate some of these basic and mundane tasks, like the administrative work that they do, grading papers, assessing learning patterns. So it's really important to really free the educators from doing kind of like this repetitive and administrating work, so that they can have more time in the classroom working with the students.
Definitely. I mean, they are probably doing all this analysis already about the student learning, but they're taking a lot of time, and the computer can just give it, for you, just give it to you, and you can work on that information. And well, knowing all this, well, AI is everywhere. It's not going to go anywhere. Actually, it will go somewhere, go forward. So, where is Microsoft currently focusing its efforts with respect to AI in education?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, as I see that, as I said, AI is not really a standalone technology. And, being in the Azure AI engineering team, now one of the principles that we have is that we provide kind of like AI solutions directly to customers, regardless of the industry that they're in. But also a key promise that we have and a guiding principle is to infuse AI in all the products and technologies we have in the portfolio. So we see AI as a standalone kind of like entity that can manifest into a solution directly for customers. And we work with a plethora of partners to do this. But also, and more importantly, it really infuses and it strengthens all of the products that we have, from Bing to Teams to Office to Windows, and now, of course, the Dynamics, kind of like the business productivity tools that we have. Specifically for education, I would say that we look to develop products or AI infused intelligent programs and technologies for students so that they can have a more interactive learning process. Also, AI can enable them to provide feedback on how they learn, to provide feedback back to the educator. And also now with the pandemic, what we've seen in the past like 18 to 24 months is that even in households and in schools where technology was not really a priority or it wasn't as invasive, we see that they all have accelerated their plans around hybrid learning, distant learning. So I think AI tools and technology in general can enable students to learn from anywhere, anytime, at any device, and intelligently move from session to session. Also, similarly on the educator side, right? We have a lot of AI kind of infused tools to provide analysis around each and every student, so that the educator can provide that personalized type of approach. And I think kind of like giving them the ability to create real-time lessons or content based on his historical data, and almost suggest kind of like a personalized path for each student is really key. So this is kind of like on the human aspect of education, but then we also see it kind of like the actual institution, as we call it, the business of schools. So how do we really optimize some of the education operations? How do we enable more adaptive learning programs? How do we provide software that analyze student process? How do we really create tools that introduce automatic and non-biased grading? And in all of this together kind of like helps really an institution and a school transform their education process.
No, definitely, and I think one of the things from the pandemic is that the schools were, they were lagging behind in the use of technology. In the admin side of things, I would say even more than in the classroom. So because they had to go online and make this digital transformation, even though it wasn't so, it was kind of an emergency way. I think now they're closer to be able to use AI because that was just something so far ahead from them. So I think now with what we've seen, talking to schools every day, I think now they are kind of reorganizing the house in terms of technology. And once they have this stabilized, they can then go on and move on to something more advanced, like the use of AI for their operations, which is going to be definitely so much better for them. Well, I think you answered my next question was what Microsoft applications can we expect to see AI enhanced? But I think you answered that those are like all.
I can mention actually a couple. I think one is the most really, I think, one of the most loved tools amongst the educators, which is the immersive reader, which is actually a free tool that is built in now into Word, into Office, into Teams, into OneNote, into Flipgrid, into Minecraft. It's like everywhere. And it's really a great tool for educators to improve, for students to improve their reading, their writing. I think it's loved not only by students who see kind of like new opportunities to start really improving and advancing their reading and writing, especially the ones that have some kind of like really accessibility considerations. But it's also very loved by families, by parents who see their kids really being able to read, at a pace and at a level that is unprecedented. So I think we're continuing to really work with our Microsoft research team and the product team to really evolve the immersive reader. So now we are introducing neural text to speech in the immersive reader tool, and it includes human sounding voices in more than 40 languages. And also another thing that my colleague Mike Tholfsen's team is working on is reading progress in Teams. So we're using AI and the mispronunciation API that is available in cognitive services to determine if the student is mispronouncing words or inserts or self corrections, and it's supported now in 37 plus languages. And the feedback that we get already from educators is that it's highly accurate, and they can use it in their classroom to correct or help students kind of like with their pronunciation.
No, that's amazing. I know so many great projects with the learning tools that are embedded in every tool. When I was teaching, that wasn't embedded in all the tools, but it was just amazing. It was in Word and then Teams, and now this reading assistants. Just I'm not teaching at the moment, but I can imagine how wonderful it is to have this being used by my students if I had some now. And well, AI is and will exponentially be embedded in our lives. So, what do you think that students should be taught about in relation to AI?
That's a great question, because I think we all see AI as a great tool to advance learning, to really help the educator, to provide equity across all students, regardless of their level or ability. But also, I think it's important to introduce. I like your idea of having it as a constant in how, and having it kind of like part of the curriculum at schools. I think it's really critical to understand how AI works, how these models are being built, what type of data feed into these models, and really the high level concept of responsible AI. We have to ask really ourselves, what makes AI different from other technologies, why responsible AI is really key. And because we see a lot of misuses of AI, right? And especially with younger kind of generations being born into this type of world. They haven't seen really the evolution. They're kind of like brought into this kind of like reality, if you will. So it's really important not only to introduce STEM, like the same way that I think we're talking about STEM as being kind of like a horizontal and a constant, regardless of whether a student wants to go into a computer science or in a technology field. I think AI needs to be absolutely taught in as a course, so that people understand how these models are built, the possible bias that can exist in them, and how we can continue, how we need to continue retraining these models and scrutinize the data that feed into them to avoid any situations like deep fake or any other kind of situation where the user's private data is compromised, or even like the recent news that we've seen from a couple of providers about manipulating public opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So bias is a huge kind of like drawback, I think, that we have to be aware of, and we have to really teach our students to ask the right questions, scrutinize, and have that critical thinking that will help us kind of like continue to evolve and make this AI better.
Yes, no, I completely agree with you. No, it's about critical thinking, understanding the ethics behind it, how it can be used, how this will affect their future lives, probably the profession that they choose. It's super important. And I think we're going to our last question now. So, what are Microsoft tips on deploying AI in schools to enhance teaching and learning and the school's operations?
That's a great question. I would say that there is no one way to go about it, and each school should have kind of like their own tech plan that will involve kind of like a plethora of tools that fit the strategy and the objectives and the goals that they have. I would start small. I think a lot of schools we've seen that they're very ambitious in their scope, and they get overwhelmed. So it's really important, I think, to really have a strategy around how to thoughtfully integrate AI and technology into schools that support certain learning outcomes. It's not technology for the sake of technology, but to support specific learning outcomes. So, and also starting small in the sense that, in every school, there is, one or two educators that are very tech savvy, and they're bringing kind of like this new approach in the classroom. So really leverage the enthusiasts, the early adopters, to really model this and create kind of like a practice within the school. Similarly, if you are kind of like a broader jurisdiction and you have several schools in the group, pick the school that again is more tech savvy, that will be more likely to successfully integrate and use this as a way to showcase how this can work, and also kind of like take the kinks out of the deployment. For example, at Microsoft, we have the concept and the programs around Showcase Schools, and also the Microsoft Innovative Educator. So these are great programs for people to join and to learn from their peers, their colleagues, and also to learn from each other how they kind of like, deploy the AI or technology at large in their classroom, in their school, learn some tips and best practices. There is not one way towards successfully really integrating AI, and each school and each educator will have to find a way that it's really authentic for them, really aligned with the goals that they have as an institution or as a classroom, and also really involve the broader community. I think the parents need to have similar education and exposure to provide the support that the students need, and they need to be part of that learning journey. And also, kind of like really going back into your previous question, I think there needs to be a practice in the school around responsible AI, so that there is a continuous kind of like learning mechanism around how things are deployed, any possible biases that will be introduced in the process, and really have a V team, or kind of like be mindful of how things can introduce inequities or any other issues in the process.
No, that's great, and it's interesting that every school has its own way. But I mean, there are certain things that you mentioned that can help all schools. For instance, using like the pilot model and
Mhm.
having releases and not going, deep dive. Having especially an understanding of what it is and what do they want to achieve before just jumping into whatever AI powered technology that appears to them, because we do see this a lot. We talk to many schools, and they all we're like, what do you want to be doing in 2, 3, 4 years? And some of them will say, I want to do AI, and you're like, that's amazing, but what do you want from
Why?
AI? Why do you want AI? And once they start thinking the whys, then it's actually a great exercise for them, because they're like, oh, I would like to be doing more personalized learning and so on. So always start with the why you're doing stuff, build your vision, and then you're going to find the ways to get there. That's definitely a good advice for all the schools. Well, Eve, it has been a real pleasure to be here with you and to learn from you as always. So thank you very, very much for this
Thank you.
interview.
Thank you. It was a great, great pleasure. It was great to see you again. And thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about AI in education.
Great. I'm sure this will help many school leaders and educators raise their game in education technology. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.